Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so very much for tuning in for today's webinar from the Smith School of Business at Queen's University. My name is Aziz Garuba. I'm a head of finance at Mortgage Market, a startup based out of Johannesburg, South Africa, and an AMBA 2012 grad. And I'm going to be your host for today's event. But before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that Queens is situated on the traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory, and we're grateful to be able to live, learn, and play on these lands. So, with everything that has been happening with regards to Canada and the US with tariffs and not tariffs, I'm very pleased to welcome you to this webinar, Why Retaliation Isn't Always the Best Move. So I'm sure many of you signed up to this thinking that, we're going to talk about this tariff situation. Today's conversation is actually not going to be as political as you might think. We're going to delve into the concept of strategic forbearance. So that deliberate choice to refrain from immediate action in certain situations to achieve a greater long-term benefit. And in a time when retaliation seems like it should be the default response to any kind of challenge or threat, it's important that understanding and harnessing the power of strategic restraint is more crucial than ever. So over the next hour, we're going to discover how to handle competition by knowing when to act and when to let things unfold. But before I dive in, let's do a bit of housekeeping. First off, we're recording the presentation, and yes, by being registered, you're going to automatically receive a link to the recording in your inbox in the coming days. So please feel free to share the link with your network once you get it. The chat feature is also open today, so you can converse with one another. You can ask questions as well. And also, we'd like to know where you're tuning in from. So feel free to write in the chat where you're joining us, your city, your country, or your company, whatever you feel like. Just let us know in the chat right now. And after the formal presentation today, our speaker is going to take some questions. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions at any time during the webinar. And I'll go through them during the Q&A session as well. And yes, do ask questions. It's an important opportunity to tap into some real expertise on today's topic. And yeah, use that Q&A button. Try and avoid not using the chat for questions just in case we miss them. But if you use the Q&A, we definitely will address your questions. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter. Goce Andrevski is an associate professor and distinguished faculty fellow of strategy at Smith School of Business, and his research focuses on competitive strategy, competitive dynamics, alliance networks, and diversity management. And he has been published in more than many top academic journals. He's got extensive experience in consulting, advising executives in industries such as the automotive industry, professional sports, and government, and helping them solve complex strategy and policy challenges. He teaches courses on dynamic strategy execution and business and corporate strategy across the undergraduate, graduate, and MBA programs. Goce, welcome. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you very much, Aziz, and thank you for this very kind introduction. And thank you for doing this webinar with me.
Awesome. So before I pass it over to Goce, I'd like to let you all know that he's going to be teaching on a new Queen's executive education program called The Art of Competitive Strategy, which is taking place in Toronto on June 4th and 5th. The program is very hands-on and will provide managers with advanced skills and AI tools for dynamic strategy analysis. So if the ideas and concepts presented today really catch your attention and you want to go deeper, this 2-day Art of Competitive Strategy program is for you. And we are going to include a link to the program in our follow-up email. And you can also see the details here. You can scan the QR code in front of you as well if you would like to get registered. All right, so let's get started. Goce, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Let me put it in a presentation mode. Should be okay now. So as Aziz introduced this webinar, really what I will try to do is to give you some practical implications of the concept of strategic forbearance that I have developed with my co-authors and published in two top journals in our field in the management, which is Academy of Management Review and Journal of Management. So I'm going to use that as a basis to introduce you to this concept and also to provide you with framework of how you can incorporate strategic forbearance into your decision making. So what is strategic forbearance? It is simply a purposeful decision to not respond to a competitive attack. Now, when I say competitive attack, what I mean is a competitive move by your rival competitor that you perceive as a threat to your market positioning, to your market share performance. So, for example, a simple price cut can be a competitive attack because in a price-sensitive market, it can really erode your market share. It can also be a competitor's repositioning, and because the competitive positioning is relative, then it will affect your relationship with customers, and then it requires response. It can be also an acquisition of another competitor, so you can feel threatened, or it can be entry of your competitor in another market or in your market segment. So any competitive move that threatens your situation. Now, competitive attacks, when they happen, the instant reaction is that you respond, you react. So if we use sports analogy, if your competitor throws a punch, you have to throw punch back. And even in this setting, which is kind of oversimplification of a business, the expectation, even performance measurement, is based on punches. In a business setting, also, managers often think in this sports way, even though not always this analogy can be translated into a business setting. So why do we do that? Why the first reaction is really to counterpunch? Well, the first reaction is because the norms in certain settings are that you respond. And the norm is created because non-response is often associated with weakness. It signals incompetence. So you have this urge to respond, and what you do is you start thinking about how to respond. So the focus, not only for practitioners, the focus for research was also focused on how to react effectively so that you can neutralize that effect. So you're thinking about what should be the magnitude of response, or what type of competitive move I should use to respond, where to respond, whether in the current market where I'm attacked or in another market, and the timing. Should we immediately respond or maybe with a little delay? But a key skill for a strategist is knowing when to react and when not. And this has been known for centuries, since Sun Tzu, the first probably articulation of strategy. But if we don't really understand when not to fight, then you're kind of one-dimensional. You're not making strategic decisions that incorporate all available information and all available options. So even if we take this example in a sports setting that I said not always can translate into business, because businesses are more complex and require, and many more factors can affect performance. But even in this very simplified example, non-action can be beneficial. You don't always win by counterpunching. So, for example, this known strategy by Muhammad Ali against George Foreman, rope the dope strategy, showed that actually it can win sometimes when we try not to engage aggressively with our rival, try to avoid counter-punching, preserve resources for later, and then at the opportune time, counterattack. So not responding to every move can be beneficial, even in a setting like this where it is least likely. Remember that your performance, the boxer's performance, is based on how many punches you throw and how many they will land, basically. So even in that situation, forbearance can be useful. Now, in business competition, forbearance happen much more often. Here is one example. Microsoft cut prices on Xbox One, which is a console for video games, and Sony decided not to respond. They said that we have other options. We don't need to cut prices. And this is an industry where cutting prices, because it is driven by network effects, it's driven by how many users of that platform are using it, and that creates attractiveness of the platform. They decided not to. And I will discuss in this webinar, I will show you the strategic reasons why actually that might be good. Even though in short term, they may lose market share, there might be other on long term, or broadly speaking, you can actually benefit from not responding. So first, let's clarify. The key conditions for strategic forbearance are awareness and capability. In order to forbear, in order to strategically refrain from responding to a rival or retaliate, you need to be aware of the attack, and also you need to have capacity to develop counterattack. Unless you're aware and capable, you're not forbearing really, because you don't have option. So the lack of awareness and lack of capability is just simply failure to act. But when you're capable, you can do it, and you decide not to because forbearance is beneficial. That's the concept that we're going to talk in this webinar. So let's first understand why forbearance is not very frequently practiced. Why strategic forbearance not always is, it is primary option of responders. When you're attacked, as I noted before, when you're attacked, then you tend to narrow your attention to the immediate stimuli. Under threat, we consider the attacker, like who attacked us, how they attacked us, and what are the immediate outcomes of it. And that's normal for every individual, not just for managers. Under threat, we tend to narrow our attention to the source of that threat. But forbearance requires that you look beyond that immediate situation. It requires a specific capacity to transcend the immediate situation, to look beyond and to look in three different dimensions. You can look beyond the attacker to consider other parties that might be important for your analysis of whether strategic forbearance is best option for you. Second, you cannot concentrate only on the short-term consequences, but you need to look broader into historical relationship with that rival, competitive interactions with it, and also future expected interactions. And third, you need to look at that counteraction that you're deliberating whether to respond or not with, not as a tactical isolated move, but broadly in relationship with all other moves that you have taken before or you're planning to take. So more systemic view. So here is what I mean by this, and I'll try to visualize this so you can better kind of relate to these concepts that are kind of dry now. So here is a simple situation. So the attacker initiates an action and the responder is seeing it as a threat. Instead of only trying to compare the cost of action and benefits of actions and cost of inaction, the responder might look more broadly. So instead of looking only at the attacker, it can look also with other rivals that might be relevant for the analysis. For example, the attacker in a simplest case, the attacker might have another ally who is more powerful even than your primary attacker, and you will create a negative relationship with that other rival that you want to avoid. It is also possible that by attacking or counterattacking, retaliating against your attacker, you can basically draw attention to other rivals, which they may enter the fray. Here's another situation by thinking about other actors, not only your attacker, like broadening your view. Another one is, it is possible that there is an other company that is an alliance partner with your attacker, which is also your alliance partner, or you can create collaborative relationship with that partner. So what this creates is, first, it improves communication, but second, it really creates a buffer or kind of tries to reduce the tension between you and the attacker. So you can better understand what the attacker wanted to do and also create some collaborative projects. So from competitive, you can turn that relationship into cooperative. Here's another example of spatial transcendence. And remember, spatial transcendence is when you consider other actors than your attacker. So for any counteraction, many other stakeholders may needs to be considered. So for example, McDonald's didn't respond to Burger King's introduction of 30% lower calorie French fries because you have to compromise on quality. And McDonald's iconic French fries that were really loved by their customers, their primary customer group, would be disappointed, and it can hurt their image within those customers. So you need to consider customers too. Another situation, for example, would be that stakeholders or other shareholders expect the company, which is usually a larger company, to not retaliate against a smaller company. Because the norm is that the large companies are more tolerant, the stronger individuals also are more tolerant to the weaker ones. We need to be more compassionate. So retaliating against a smaller, less powerful, it can be considered as bullying, which you will lose in long term. So strategic forbearance is better in this case than counteraction, even if it costs you a little, loss of market share. So that was the first type of transcendence. The other transcendence mode is temporal. So you don't look only the period surrounding the attack, but you look more broadly, historically. So for example, it is possible that you have history of competitive interactions that have led to cooperation. And I'm not talking here about collaboration or being partnered with somebody. Even two parties, they're highly antagonistic against each other. Over time, can develop this attitude of live and let live. What means is that over time you realize that you're codependent, and that it is better to not kind of erode that relationship, because it can continue in the future and can lead to more benefits. So, for example, Axelrod was observing a situation in World War II when there was two units who did not even listen to the commands of their mayors because they realized that none can move the front line. So instead of losing lives, they started not attacking one another. So even if by accident something happens, they will try to refrain from retaliating for that, because that was their best move. So what has happened over time has developed that cooperation. So you need to look historically with this rival and whether it's worth it to counterattack and kind of weaken those benefits or those kind of tolerant competition with one another. Another one is that you might have collaborative relationship with the attacker already, existent one. In other words, it is possible that you are competing and collaborating at the same time. So by retaliating in one market, you may actually negatively affect your beneficial collaborative tie with that competitor. And Apple and Google are doing this most often. For temporal transcendence, here's another example. It is beneficial to not respond, to forbear, for learning reasons too. Because when you don't respond, it gives you time to first see whether that attack will show to be profitable for the attacker. And also it gives you time to learn how they do it and then respond later. If, of course, the assessment is if whether the attacker can establish some barriers to entry later or not. So in this case, Airbus just said, no, we are not responding to this. Although everybody was expecting them to respond, they said, no, we'll wait and see. We'll observe what happens first. And third type of group of considerations for not responding or for benefiting from not responding is systemic. For example, Southwest Airlines decided to forbear, to not respond to the adoption of no frills basic economy. They said that that's inconsistent with our strategy, basically. What we have, we think, better opportunities that fit our brand. In this case, the Southwest Airlines is considering that counteraction will require you to commit resources to a course of action that is inconsistent with how they deliver value. And not reacting actually is beneficial because you will commit your resources towards other options that will be more valuable and will reinforce your competitive positioning in long term. It is also possible that you might have a different projection of what will happen in the industry. For example, Toyota believed, at least while IQ Toyota was the CEO, which was replaced in past year, I think. But he believed that the electric vehicle market will not be overtaking the entire automotive industry. That the automotive industry, in his view, will be segmented market where EVs will have only large percentage, but then they'll also have gasoline cars, they'll have hybrid, and maybe another technology. So for them, not investing, not committing exclusively to electric vehicles is costly, but at the same time provides benefits from them by not doing that because they can commit and strengthen their position in gasoline market. So this is kind of to get an idea of all these different ways how to can benefit from not responding. Now, how you can use this? I'm going to show you a framework. It's called AMC framework, or Awareness, Capability, and Motivation framework. So basically, the framework is simple to use, and I will show you how you can kind of implement it. But basically, it says that there are three conditions to be satisfied for a company to act or to counteract. The first one is you need to be aware of the attack. Otherwise, you'll fail to act. The second one is capability. So if you are aware but not capable, again, you fail to act. But if you're capable, then the motivation includes the considerations that we talked about. So first, when you're analyzing whether to respond or whether if you attack somebody, the rival will be able to respond, first you assess the awareness, or you try to expand your awareness. So the first set of questions that you're analyzing, and that's why this is framework, it's not prescriptive, but it will guide your decision making. You need to first consider the early warning signs of an attack. So you want to know before the attack happens whether something has been in development or not. Then, are there other potential competitors that you're not aware of? And potential competitors can be companies that compete in other markets, maybe more peripheral markets where you're not following, that can actually have adjacent capabilities. That capabilities can be transferred into your market, and then they will attack you. And equally important, what are the intentions behind the attack? Because if you don't know the intentions, you cannot respond effectively. And from the attacker perspective also, how closely does my rival monitors my actions? And that which will give you a better sense of whether they will respond or not. So if awareness is not there, then obviously there is no forbearance. But then the next questions are about assessing your capability. And what do? You try to see whether there are barriers for you to develop counteraction. And there are two types of barriers. One is action development barriers. The other one is action execution barriers. Action development barriers can be, you want to develop this product that will match your rival's product, but you don't have access to inputs, raw materials, rare metals, whatever. It can also be because there is no complementary or supplementary products, like access to charging stations. It is also possible that you have invested recently in certain other projects that consumed most of your resources. So your resource commitment and allocation forbids you from developing another a counteraction that will be effective. It can also be some assets that you're lacking or expertise. But even if you have all these expertise and inputs and so on, you still may fail to respond or will not be able to respond because there's some bureaucracies in it that it will take you longer to develop your response. It could also be limitation to distribution channels and so on. When you have capability, then the strategic forbearance consideration is critical. And please have in mind that most of the considerations about responding to an attack are considering the cost and benefits of response and the cost of not responding. But in this webinar, I'm emphasizing the benefits of non-response. And those benefits are, which I discussed already, can be combined in 5 general categories. The first one is to de-escalate rivalry. You can consider other parties that can de-escalate rivalry. You can consider avoiding actions when it exacerbates or kind of creates animosity with other partners. The second one is to gain relational benefits or historically cooperation, because competitive interactions are very complex and they evolve over time. So want to preserve and mitigate rivalry because of those relationships. To preserve existing norms or expectations that your stakeholders have, which in long term you can lose much more than what you will try to prevent losing in short term. Forbearance also provides you with optionality. Not committing resources to one action actually gives you options to act on other opportunities. So there's always a consideration that there is a learning opportunity and opportunity to act on other projects. And finally, you want to ensure strategic alignment. You want to avoid disruptions, misalignment. If your company has developed strategic priorities, counteraction that is inconsistent with the direction of your company might be avoided, and those resources will be reoriented towards what you believe is more beneficial for your company. Now, in this concept, what we did in another study, a second study, was we tried to see empirically to understand these decisions and the reasons behind these decisions. Like why, for example, managers will forbear, and what would be the reasons, and whether our theoretical concepts can align with those. So what we did was we taped basketball games, and we interviewed coaches after the game while watching the game. So I was kind of taking notes on what they say about what they intend to do and what they not to do. So the reasons why not. And some of those reasons I'm going to present later. But Phil Jackson, one of the winningest coaches in NBA history, in his book, have mentioned these two reasons. That not only coaches forbear towards other competitors, but they forbear when they need to take action with their own players. So, for example, Phil Jackson refuses to take timeout, even if the result is going down, that the opponent is on a run. And the reason for that is because he wants to force his players to learn how to deal with situations that are difficult. They're going with the hurdles during the game, and how they'll learn how to deal with such challenging situations. He says often let the clock keep running at the point so that players will be forced to come up with a solution on their own. So they want, what he's basically saying is that the short-term losses are lower than the long-term benefits of not reacting, not taking time out, not replacing a player. We also found in that study that is consistent with what anecdotally Phil Jackson was saying. We find that more accomplished coaches choose forbearance more frequently. And there are at least two reasons for that. One is consistent with our theory that they don't have transcendence capacity. So they don't evaluate the strategic value of not responding. They don't look beyond the current situation. Another reason, or maybe both reasons are relevant, is that they are more confident. And they're more confident to make decisions, to refrain from retaliating when the fans and the other stakeholders are expecting them to do. Let me elaborate more on this. Because every action, the stakeholders are expecting the defenders to counteract. Otherwise, they feel that they're incompetent or weak. It forces them to respond. And only coaches that are comfortable with themselves, that can push those expectations away and make the decision that is best for their team, will forbear. So those are the kind of the two findings that we observed when we looked at those basketball coaches and how they make decisions. We also identified more specific reasons why they forbear and why they expect that not responding is good for them. Is, for example, to surprise a rival, but to surprise not the current rival, but the rival in other games. Because when they don't do something, they don't reveal any information, and then other competitors are later on surprised with certain type of zone defense. For those that are not into basketball, maybe don't understand, but it's a type of defense. Also, they want to confuse and mislead, because they want to, when somebody attacks you, they already have calculated that you will respond. And then there's silence. So they're wondering what happened. So they want to mislead them that actually they're weak, but then later they attack them much stronger. They want also to disrupt their rhythm, to optimize resource usage, to preserve strategic consistency, because some actions that your rival takes are inconsistent with what you try to achieve. And oftentimes you want to develop resources, like the examples that I gave you earlier, because you preserve those resources, you don't commit them to counteraction, but then you provide opportunity to develop them into another action taken later. They also said that, because they don't replace players when they make mistakes, that regains their confidence, or when they're up 30 points, they don't they replace their best players because they don't want to hurt the dignity of their rival and so on. So there are social reasons, there are psychological reasons, and so on that we are kind of exploring. In a paper that is in development currently, with Julian Barling, with Matthias Spitzmüller, with Melissa Trevisono, we are trying to develop this kind of leadership behavior or leadership approach where it uses forbearance more frequently, and the early results are showing that actually when both sides know why and the reasons behind forbearance, so the followers and the leaders, and the followers know their role in it, then the performance is increasing. So overall, strategic forbearance is not weakness. Strategic forbearance is a very potent move that managers should use more often. And with that, I'm open to take any questions you have. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Goce. I think that was a very appropriate presentation, and well-timed. I think we've got a few questions from the audience, and I'm just going to start right away. There's a question from Amit. What if inaction is perceived by stakeholders as non-caring and lack of creativity and resourcefulness?
When inaction is perceived?
Sorry?
Or when action is perceived? Because
yeah, it's like,
in any situation, you have a norm to respond and norm not to respond, and you need to consider both and basically understand the situation in which. So if stakeholders are expecting that you respond, then you need to evaluate and assess: is it really beneficial for my company or not? If in the long run you lose by not aligning with the values of your stakeholders, then obviously the benefits of forbearance will be higher than the cost. But if it is a different situation where the expectation is that you don't attack, then again, you see whether by aligning with your stakeholders, you take better action and you benefit in the long run. So really, it depends, and it's very context specific. Thank you for the question.
Cool. Yeah. We've got another one from Aruran. How do you accurately assess the outcome of a decision, especially with a competitor? And goes on to say it could be like Medusa, where cutting off one head produces more, or where when you make one decision, the competitor might make another decision, which enables other possible actions for them and consequences to yourself that you did not foresee. So how do you accurately assess the outcome?
Yeah, so that is why I presented the framework. And if you remember, I mentioned that the difference between framework and model is that the model will tell you how to make that decision. The framework will give you all necessary factors that you need to consider, and then you make decision in a real situation. So it is the model and the strategic forbearance concept needs to be considered together with all options that you have. And that's why I gave you all these different actions that you need to go through in order to come up with the right decision for your own company. So don't expect universal principles that will lead you to a certain response. So you put in a model all the information and it will create the best decision. No, it leaves the decision making to you. But what I try to tell you in this webinar is that you should not neglect the power of strategic forbearance, of not retaliating. And the thinking about using strategic forbearance can change. And hopefully we'll talk later about even kind of apply it in a different context.
Awesome. And we've got a question from Robert. So in the example of tariffs, right, retaliation can be considered a way to curb the expansion in tariffs. And in real life, a lack of counteraction can easily be viewed as weakness, allowing the attacker to take further advantage. What would you say to this argument? And it says, I can see in the corporate world, you provided good examples of forbearance, where forbearance can be beneficial. Do you have an example of when the lack of action could be detrimental? So I think there's two questions there. Like, what do you say to the argument of, of where the lack of response can be seen as a weakness, and then what an example of where that lack of action is detrimental?
Okay, so let's answer the first one first. I thought a little bit about this situation. So I don't have all the necessary information, obviously, with the tariffs and so on, but I knew because of the title that it will provoke some questions. So let me give you my reasoning and my application of what I just presented. So how would I go with to decide how to respond? So you first start with what is known or some facts of the situation. And the facts are first that the intent, at least at the beginning, and still now, I would say, is not clear. So what they want to achieve. And without knowing the intent, it's very difficult to find a most effective response. And second, we are more dependent on them than they are on us. We, Canada, is more dependent on United States than vice versa because they're bigger market and the proportion of we sell to them is much bigger than they sell in our market. So if we start with these two, then the best response can be separated in two parts. The first one is pre-tariff or threat of tariff. And the second one is after tariffs are implemented. So pre-tariff situation, they threaten. You don't know exactly what they want, but you know they're more dependent. So the benefits of forbearance are probably higher than anything else. Why? Because you want to de-escalate the situation. So you want to mitigate any factor that can actually lead to actually implementing those tariffs and the amount of those. So the responses, emotional responses like, oh, we are going to do even more, I don't think it is reasonable, to be honest. We are talking about pre-tariff, like we are responding on threats in a situation where we need to de-escalate the situation. And of course, that happened because earlier I discussed the expectations. Ontario was in elections and there are federal elections. And most people find offended that they're talking that way, especially these ridiculous claims of first 51 first state or whatever. So the emotional response is that. And because of that, the politicians' actual verbal threats were made, even though they were not appropriate at the time. Now, after tariffs happen, it's different because they already have acted. And when tariffs happen, it reveals more. When action is executed, you have more information what they wanted to achieve with it. And also the impact that it may have, because now you know which industries, where it is targeted, and so on. So now you have a little bit more information. They're still more dependent, but you have information. So now, what would be the best response? Well, of course, complete forbearance is not an option because it will hurt us, and we are not benefiting much. But counter tariffs are not the best way, because you will lose more than they will lose. However, that doesn't mean you don't respond at all. What you do is you take actions which are commitments, not empty threats that, oh, we will do this even though they know we are more dependent. Commitments to certain projects that they will know that in the long run, they will lose more than they will benefit in short term. For example, creating relationships with other nations, opening up new markets, creating greater production, becoming more independent, and so on, which some of those initiatives are already mentioned in the media. So that's this is how the way the strategic forbearance can be incorporated in making these decisions whether to respond or not. So to summarize, do not respond with counter threats, verbal threats, when there is only a threat, and then respond to actual actions, tariffs, but with other ways, with other types of actions, other commitments, not by kind of matching the tariffs that they imposed or doing other tariffs.
All right, agreed.
Oh, of course, probably there are many others, many of you would disagree with this analysis, but I try to tell you how I would reason using the concept I just talked about.
Sure. And I think you highlighted a good point. You know, there were circumstances that, like if we're using the Canada-US situation, you know, the elections, new prime minister, there was a lot of circumstance that, you know,
so the
everyone
expectations are
felt
correct.
Yeah. Yes, you know, there's a high expectation that there must be some kind of a response. Yeah, but good points. Good points.
The second question was when inaction is very costly, and in this case, inaction is not costly because it is a tariff that will not hurt our economy in 15 days. It will take time, you know, to do that. Yes, one might argue that by imposing these threats, then the companies will start changing their decisions, and then those are long-term decisions that can hurt, even though in short term we cannot see the outcomes of it. Yeah, but you can still respond when it is best. You can timely respond still without escalating the situation.
Awesome. Cool. And a pretty funny question from Leslie. Can today's trend of ghosting be seen as strategic forbearance?
Ghosting?
Yeah.
What does she mean
So
by
basically
that?
basically just leaving someone, you know, unanswered, unread, you know.
Oh, yeah. So I can, you know, I know that not responding when you do some unethical thing for some companies, it's the worst response. So I'm not saying here the strategic forbearance is always better. That's why the key for best strategists is knowing when to act, when not to act. So not responding to the public and not explaining what happened when some oil spillover, for example, happens, or you know, some things that corporations do that will impact the environment. It's the worst possible response, and that's what research shows. So not responding can also be bad. It's just that it is important to know that there is also good things, and if everybody thinks that not responding is always bad, and they're neglecting an option of not engaging in response when it is actually beneficial for your company.
Right. Cool. So question from David. Given your research findings that more accomplished coaches use forbearance more frequently, how might organizations develop leadership development programs that specifically cultivate this type of strategic patience and confidence to withstand stakeholder pressure for immediate action, especially when those leaders aren't yet established enough to have the credibility or um, experience-rooted confidence of a person like Phil Jackson?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's a great research question. So if you want, you can join me on a paper like that. We are in the process of working on a paper that discusses how managers internally can use forbearance decisions to motivate employees and to increase their productivity. But for externally, we haven't done a study like that with practical implications. In this study with your own followers as a leader, we suggest some implications for leadership. Like, at least the first step would be make them aware that actually understanding that forbearance is beneficial, even if it goes against the shareholders' expectations. But for specific ways how to train them, probably it will be through case studies, but not case studies where you read the case and then you kind of make comments or analyze. It should be interactive case, the case where you make decision and then you get a response. So I use some simulations that people can see the action and the outcomes of the action, and then retrospectively understand, so that after several decisions like that, they start learning and it becomes automatic that you consider the strategic forbearance in your decision making.
Very cool. I think maybe even a follow-up to that, and I don't know if your research or experience has looked into this, but within the startup space, right, where there's um, a general need for urgency and pace of doing things,
Yeah.
and you've got competitors that do something, and you go back and it's like, oh my goodness, they dropped that new upgrade before we were able to push ours out. What have you seen, if any, in that kind of space? And do you feel that strategic forbearance would actually be more beneficial for a lot of startups, that are chasing valuations or chasing go-to-market or product market fit?
Well, especially for smaller companies, strategic forbearance can be even more beneficial. And that is because they have limited resources. So you don't want to respond to every action that your competitors are taking without pursuing your own value and establishing your positioning on the market. So for smaller companies, prioritizing what you do and making consistent actions is even more important. Now, let me briefly talk, which is relevant with the small and medium-sized companies, but also with any corporations, to the previous question on how to train. We just got I had time a little bit to think about it. Think about how pilots are trained. They're not trained by you throw them in a company and then they destroy a company, like managers, or in this case, a pilot put in an airplane, and then if you survive and make a good decision, you survived or not. They do simulations. They make specific situations where it requires thinking about whether to act, whether not to act, and what would be consequences of it. So the more situations like that you experience, the more you become capable of making the right decision in the right place. The right decision would be sometimes to act, and even more, like I don't want to underestimate the importance of action. I mean, action is what makes things, right? Counteraction is very important. You need to defend. You need to neutralize the attacks of rivals. So that's also important. But don't neglect the important, maybe kind of concealed power of not acting and pursuing other options.
Okay, very cool. I think we'll just take one last question from Isabel. How does strategic forbearance differ or is better than, say, crisis or risk management?
Well, crisis management or risk management is a situation. It's a problem. It's a challenge. And in that challenge, you need to consider how you develop a strategy. So strategic forbearance is a decision that can be employed can be deployed in a situation like crisis, where you have unanticipated event that kind of created a mess in your industry. And then a forbearance can be one of a set of decisions. So you make an action to remedy the situation, and then you see that rivals are taking advantage of the situation. So maybe you don't do that because of the crisis that amplifies the negative effects, but then you act on something else. So you have to look at it as a series of actions where forbearances will take place in some of that chain of decisions that they're making.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to get a little bit more information about your Queen's Executive Education Program that expands on what we've covered today. So the art of competitive strategy. Any things that you want to share that that the audience can look forward to?
I can probably get a little bit more specific examples. What is the approach of teaching? For example, let me share my screen again. So this executive education program is focusing on understanding who are your rivals, what are their strategies, and how to coexist with those competitors, how to respond, how to not to respond, and how to create your own positioning relative to competitors. So it is kind of following a dynamic strategy where you need to consider what competitors are doing and how you stand against them. So for example, we'll use AI to generate kind of network maps like this, where you're not focusing on what they say their strategy is, but what they actually do, or where they commit resources, what types of activities they choose to do in order to understand their strategy. We'll also talk about, or I'll teach managers how to visualize the market space. Like this is done, for example, in ChatGPT, which is pretty simple. You just need to know the commands to ask for specific things. But this is based on positioning across many attributes of computer makers. The approach will be interactive. So there are two types of cases I use. One is where the students can talk with one another, and then they'll be challenged by AI. Another one is a set of cases in this case in ChatGPT, where they will ask like consultants certain information, and then they need to use that information to understand what's the problem and how to respond to it, and how to develop strategy that is best for that situation. So I try to kind of make it practical, where they deal with actual companies and actual decisions. I don't think we can hear you.
Oops, I was on mute. Thank you, Goce, for your fantastic insights today. This was really, really informative and I think very timely. And everyone from Smith School of Business at Queen's University, thank you for tuning in. Our next webinar will be coming up soon, so keep an eye out in your inboxes for a lot more information. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.